That clause 2 stand part.
Yeah, Mr Chairman.
The Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Mr Chairman, this clause is one which is particularly interesting to the Labour Party because it does go to the timing of when this comes into effect and the method by which it is brought into effect. And part of the debate will be around the time and part will be around the method. Whether these days, as we sacrifice our economic sovereignty and our political sovereignty and our parliamentary sovereignty, whether in fact it should be brought into effect by some stamping by Warner Brothers in the United States rather than by royal assent in New Zealand. And we'll have a discussion about what the appropriate method these days, now that we have sacrificed our integrity as a parliament to the whims of a foreign company, according to Mr Joyce, although I actually tend to believe Jerry Brownlee. I tended to believe Jerry Brownlee when he said that this wasn't really important to Warners and they didn't want it. I tended to believe him when he said that, rather than Stephen Joyce, when he said that in the answer to question 1 this afternoon, rather than what Stephen Joyce said. So, Mr Chairman, that may or may not be the case. But the next point that we need to focus on is what do we mean by the day after the date? Do we mean the New Zealand date or the date on the west coast of the United States? And by the day after, do we mean the day after on the United States, the date in New Zealand, or vice versa? Or are we going to be consistent? And if it's is it A and A and B and A, or A and B or B and A? And there's a combination, there's a real combination of days and dates that we could have in order to work through this particular question. And in fact, if we the member, I think Russell Norman, mentioned Avatar recently. If we take some of the interesting approaches within that movie as to time. And the way that there's the ability to time shift and world shift, it might well be that we come up with a number of unusual answers. And the day after the date on which it receives the royal assent could in fact be quite a long way back in Middle Earth. If we jump from Avatar back into the Lord of the Rings and that series. So, Mr Chairman, I think there is given the modern world that we live in the world of movies, there is a lack of preciseness in the definition in this particular. The next question is whether, as part of this exercise, we are going to move to have the dates on the Parliament, currently unsponsored, whether we're going to have the 28th of October sponsored by Warners. Is that what we're going to have? Is that how we're going to date? Is that how we're going to have the date here? And if that is the case, will that mean that it moves forward under urgency, stays the same under urgency, or takes the industrial relations approach of the National Party and moves backwards under urgency and as we go to the date? I do want to make a passing, slightly irrelevant comment, Mr Speaker, about Avatar, which was referred to by Russell Norman, and say that one of the interesting experiences for me was spending time on one of these hooey criticised by Jerry Brownlee with James Cameron when he's trying to make up his mind whether he wanted to have Avatar produced in New Zealand. Now that was, but Mr Speaker, that was US time rather than New Zealand time. That was West Coast time, 6 hours different. I think it'll probably be getting on for 3:30 in the morning over there now, but yesterday. And I think that just about sums up the approach of Jerry Brownlee on this. He thinks he's slightly ahead, but actually he's a long way behind, because the world has just about caught up to him. He has been so backward in this particular area. And Mr Chairman, I'm not sure the approach that the National Party wants to take. Mr Chairman.
Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Mr Chairman, the question of time is one on which there is some focus in the Hobbit. In fact, the Hobbit is full of riddles, and one of them is called the time riddle. This one, in fact. This thing all things devours, birds, beasts, trees and flowers, gnaws iron, bites steel, grinds hard stone to meal, slays kings, ruins town, and beats high mountain down. It's one of Gollum's riddles for Bilbo Baggins, of course, and the answer, of course, Mr Speaker, is time. And that's what we're talking about now. The answer that we're talking about today is time, and we're trying to work out when the right time is to bring this legislation in. Now, some of us would say never. There is never a right time, but then other of us would say, given the fact there's a possibility of this bill getting through, when might a better time to have it brought into effect be? And the suggestion that I've made in this clause, although it's different from the next clause, which is more an expiry clause, but clause 2 is a clause which would omit all the words after force and insert the words the 1st of April 2012. And the reason for that, Mr Chairman, is relatively simple. That would give, Warners have already spent $100 million on the movie. It will give them a chance to get on with making the movie, and we would be able to see whether this legislation is necessary or not. And my bet is it would be totally unnecessary. It's been unnecessary for the 120 films that have been made in New Zealand, feature films that have been made in New Zealand in the last decade, mainly with the help of much of the work done by my colleague Pete Hodgson to facilitate that, to facilitate the schemes and to do the work in that area. It wasn't necessary then, but as you know, we're reasonable people. We'll keep a bit of an open mind on it. And we're prepared to work through over the next year, over the period of election campaign, whether or not whether it's necessary or not. And by having a deferral of it being brought into force, then that would give us the possibility of examining it more carefully. There are some other suggestions on the supplementary order paper for having other methods of examination. Mr Speaker, it would also give some of the thespians around the chamber time to practice their skills, to hone their skills, to work towards whether they could have roles on The Hobbit. And I know that there is quite a lot of interest in here. Mr Chairman, it's been a very long time myself since people have wanted me for a part which involved my face in a movie. And in fact, the last time, Mr Speaker, that I was involved. No, Brotown. They had me on Brotown was probably the last dramatic. Although most of my colleagues won't remember Close to Home, but that was a good regular income when I was an employee while I was a student and made a lot of money. Mr Speaker, I'm not suggesting that this bill should be backdated. In fact, I'd be very upset if it was backdated until the late 1960s or early 1970s or whenever it was that I had those bit parts in Close to Home. No, it wasn't. Well, it might have been very early 70s. Mr Chairman, I know it was certainly well experienced by 1973. Because one of my kids actually had a bit part in it in 1974, I think. So, Mr Chairman, what we are focusing on now is whether it is appropriate to backdate this to having it come in force. So, the more Muldoon approach to make it retrospective, and what the implications of that would be, or whether I think the more reasonable approach, the approach that I've